Kate, welcome. Great to
Thanks
see
so
you in this sort of like strange period of time. It's been a time since I saw you in our lovely Riverside foyer, but it's great to see you again, giving up your time to actually talk to Riverside, where you visited a number of times.
Yeah,
just before we start, I'd just like to quickly acknowledge the Darug people on which I'm meeting, and you'll be meeting on...
the Eora Nation, home of the Gadigal people.
Okay, three. And just pay both our respects to Aboriginal people who eventually might see some of this interview that we're about to do. Anyway, away we go. Now, little introduction to Kate. Kate Champion, I think the name is indicative of something. She is a bit of a champion because Kate's had over 30 years experience as a director, a choreographer, a teacher, performer across theatre, dance, film and opera. I don't know much of your film work, so we might find out a bit about that as we go.
Not a lot of film. You could probably throw circus in there. Bit of film, not a lot.
Bit of circus, okay. 3 of her productions have been performed at Riverside, and one of those was the very, very first production of the National Theatre of Parramatta, but we'll talk more about those in a little while. But firstly, Kate, what I'd love to ask you, what are your first memories and experiences of performance as a young child?
Oh, well, that's interesting. You know my brother, Stephen, so he's quite responsible for a bit of that. I remember being taken to a performance, or he took me to a performance of Lindsay Kemp. And it was Romeo and Juliet was on stilts to represent the balcony. And I remember a lot of men in dresses and a lot of powder.
A lot of powder, I know. I once got kissed by Lindsay Kemp. Oh. And it took me days to get the powder off my clothes, I think. There was a lot of it.
Yeah, and David Bowie worked a bit with Lindsay Kemp, I believe.
Where did you see that? In Sydney, at the Valhalla or another?
Oh, look, I was very young. I don't know where it was. That was one early memory. A very strong memory for me too is Betty Blockbuster, seeing Reg Livermore do that.
Oh, well, at the back of me at the moment, you probably can't see it, but look.
Oh, look.
There's Reg's show that he did here at Riverside. That's
well, there you go. How's that?
It was right at the very opening of Riverside, and it was called...
Larrikin's Opera. A Larrikin's Opera?
No.
Oh, at the top?
Oh, Big Sister. It was called Big Sister. And it was here. And it was supposed to be a huge success, and it wasn't, which was a bit of a pity because it had all those wonderful successes down at the Bijou at Balmain.
Right.
Anyway, yeah. So Betty Blockbuster, also a bit of an influence.
And so I was first to get my tickets just last festival for the reincarnation of it. But I do remember we had the vinyl record at home and played it endlessly. So yes, Men in Frocks, I think, and Jesus Christ Superstar I remember going to, and Godspell. But also I did dance from a very young age, and so I actually performed at one of the choreographic competitions for the Australian Elizabethan Theatre Trust. I was very young, and I just remember, look, I think some theatres now don't quite have that musty, incredibly tantalizing smell to a young person that they had, the history, and I'm sure a lot of it was dust and lack of cleaning, but I do remember that atmospheric feeling of being inside a theatre.
Everything was a lot more atmospheric. It was a lot more dangerous. Workplace health and safety wasn't really taken into account very much.
No, so I have a story with you about that, but that's a bit...
you do, and I'm going to go on to that because I was going to say, we actually, I think, first met at the Seymour Centre when I was there as the manager of the Seymour Centre in the early 1980s, and you were in a very physical circus-style production with your brother, Stephen, who's been for many years now a great manager up at Bathurst, at the Bathurst Entertainment Centre, and he wasn't not long out of Circus Oz, where he was sort of like trapeze artist extraordinaire, I remember. And there you were both in this show at the Seymour Centre. So tell us a little bit about that production. I've forgotten its name again. How early was that in your career, and why the hell were you in it?
It was Suspense. It was called Suspense. It was 1983. Stephen had just left Circus Oz. I had been dancing in Germany in a dance company there from age 16. I'd come back, I'd work with one extra. And look, it was very driven by Stephen. He had this desire, which pre-Legs on the Wall, pre-so many other multi-form physical theatre companies, to make a work that had dance and circus. And we had a stunt man. We had, you know, original storyline that we wanted to encompass the audience in a visceral experience. So we had floating seating banks and seating banks on truck tires. And anyway, so Stephen knew that, you know, he got me involved. So I was too scared to tell him how scared of heights I was. So I just said yes to that I'd do a trapeze.
This is to your brother who spent most of his time at the top of a tent.
Yes, and as a clown falling off the high wire.
Oh my God.
Anyway, so we did a trapeze act together. But look, it was him getting me involved in, and I'd worked on one extra on devised work as well, but this was very much, even without a director, it was quite collectively devised. Wendy Blacklock let us use the car park underneath the Australian Elizabethan Theatre Trust to rehearse in. We made our own acrobatic mats and almost got too high from the glue that we used for it. But look, it was extraordinary. We had a man playing, who was a stunt man, Paul Alexander, who we actually set on fire. And we had fire in the production, and I'll never forget.
Fire?
Night. Well, yes. And they tried to close us down, I think, because whoever the authorities were found out that
in those days, it was
setting someone alight.
It was the Chief Secretary's department in those days, and they used to come to the Seymour Centre and they test whether you'd actually fireproofed your things by getting a cigarette lighter, lighting it and walking around and seeing something caught fire. So you didn't actually have to set anything on fire yourself. They'd come and see whether they could set your stuff on fire.
All right.
There you go.
Well, my memory was that we were potentially not going to be able to open on opening night. Half an hour before, I'm probably making it more dramatic than it was. And I remember hearing that you were prepared to take the risk and you let it go ahead.
I've been taking a lot of risk over the years. It's got a bit harder taking risk these days.
Yes.
But it is an important element. Everyone's got to take a little bit of risk in this, because if you don't take risk and you don't try something new, then we just basically, nothing happens. So we've got to make things happen.
But I've got to say, Robert, that show, because of its multi-art form, seeded in me a real lack of boundaries as far as art forms are concerned. And that's been very much part of what you've done. And of course, then you founded a little bit later, but maybe going on another 20 years, you founded the wonderful Force Majeure in 2002, and right up until 2015, which is 13 years. Maybe that was the unlucky year. I'm not sure. And you created some beautiful physical theatre works. You won a Helpman Award and a number of Australian Dance Awards, and you were celebrated as one of our leading lights in the performing arts. So why was Force Majeure important to you? Oh, Robert, it was a lifelong dream for me to work with people who I felt I had a like-minded aesthetic and desire to make original work, Australian work, a work that spoke to concerns about society and dilemmas, and use any form that we could get our hands on, although dance and theatre were the two leading ones. That was my life's dream, to be able to start a company like that. So it just felt to me like the most exciting bringing together of everything that I'd done up until then, but also just to take the risk to make original work for me, makes so much sense as an artist. I'm not putting down anyone that makes work that already exists, but for me, that original authorship, which is with not just me, but the people that I worked with, is one of the most exciting things to leave behind and to inspire people. I think it's what inspires me most when I go to the theatre, because it feels so fresh and so present and so about the moment that we're living in.
I remember seeing a work, I think you did at Carriage Works, where there were lots of styrofoam balls, and it just kept shifting shapes, the amazing shapes that happened through that. I'm not very good at names, as you probably noticed. I can't remember any of the names of things anymore. But what was that?
That was called Not in a Million Years, and it was about very extreme circumstances. So the miners that were stuck in Tasmania underground are brought to life, and a woman winning the lottery, and all these extreme things that are meant to be positives in people's lives, but aren't necessarily.
So how would you what made the work at Force Majeure unique? Because it was unique. How would you characterise that special uniqueness that you seem to create? Because Force Majeure work was always seen to be something that was very much attached to you, but we recognised it as something that wasn't happening in a lot of other places.
Well, it was definitely not just me. It was particularly a relationship between Jeff Cobb and Ros Hervey and myself. And they live in Adelaide. I always tried to entice them to Sydney, but in retrospect, I think the distance was also an interesting aspect of it. So it was something about the chemistry of the way we work as a three people, with one often operating as a sounding board, but with Jeff's lighting and set design and Ros's history, working with Meryl Tankard and Dance North as I had, and just and our age and it's something, we have a shorthand where we almost don't have to explain anymore what it is that we're after. But I guess we were always trying to use what we knew, but trying not to repeat ourselves, trying to take something that seemed relevant to the time. And I think it's the not being scared of the boundaries of just taking whatever we thought was interested in. Look, with a piece like The Age I'm In, we actually used these screens that we kind of invented before iPads even existed. So we were also forging, working with technical aspects as well. I think we were I think it was about just not being scared, not being alienating towards our audience, but being experimental nonetheless in the form. So always wanting to bring our audiences with us and I would often get frustrated that I think clarity of meaning shouldn't be confused with simplicity. There can be complexity and layers within clarity. And I think we were always wanting to always wanting our audiences to know what we were communicating, but also have incredible poetic and metaphoric, I guess, aspects through the forms that we were using.
Well, you sort of like hinted there that it's really these wonderful moments when a group of people come together and are of a like mind. They have a similar aesthetic, they have a similar passion, they want to do something which is actually going to break barriers, do something that's new. And it sounds like you can continue to do that. I mean, you introduced text into force majeure work almost as part of what the work was, like one of your works without text being involved was fairly unusual, I think. Originally, did you have text in it early? Or always had text?
Same but different. Pretty much every cast, you could say, had half professionally known trained actors and half known as professional dancers. And I often also used untrained people completely, but there was always half the content was words or text, and half often movement, and then a lot of blurring in between. What this major step, we tried to work with writers and did work with writers. We worked with Brendan Cowell on one piece called Already Elsewhere, and he was the writer on it. But we also, when I started to use verbatim text that I sourced myself through marketing firms, of interviewing all sorts of people from every walk of life, and using those interviews and editing them and using them almost as our soundscape and almost as the text, was another breakthrough for us in form and bringing a certain content and storytelling to the work.
And of course, as that period unfolded, eventually it seemed that you wanted to work on works where text was actually the primary sort of like component of the work, that you were going to interpret that text. So the first occasion that I saw that was when Food came here, which was a production was a co-production, wasn't it, between Force Majeure and Belvoir Street?
That's correct, yeah.
And it toured and it came to us, and I remember you worked alongside Steve Rogers, who obviously became a bit of a partner in crime as time went on, as well with some other projects. And I remember it as being a very intimate, funny, moving work that had deep emotions in it. It was pretty erotic from time to time, as I can remember as well. And I remember the sharing of the food with the audience as well. I mean, tell us a little about the challenges and joys of that production, because in a sense it seemed to me that text came first and movement came to join it, as opposed to maybe a force majeure where the choreographic movement began the work and then the text joined the work. But I might be totally wrong on that. I'm interested to hear what you actually, whether Food was the first occasion when you started to explore a different sort of process.
Well, definitely from my process, that was different. So I worked with Stevie on Cloud Street, actually. That's when we first...
Wow, that was even further back.
Yeah, and his sister, Karen Rogers, was the original general manager of Force Majeure. So she was also a partner in crime in building the company. And she said that Stevie had this play. He was interested in whether Force Majeure would produce this play. And he gave it to me to read. And I said, look, I think it's great, but I don't know where it fits in our remit as far as doing dance theatre, because it's pretty much a play. And he said, no, I think there's really room for for movement in this. And so we struck a deal that the first workshop, we would find every part of the script where he saw movement possibilities, and we would work on those first. And then if there was enough there to warrant us working together on taking it further, we would do that. And so that's what we did. We had a kind of physical workshop on the script as the first stage of working on it. And that was kind of an interesting way to step into it. And then it was definitely 3 actors who weren't trained dancers. And in fact, the first workshop had Leah Purcell in it, and Basil Buzzy and Emma Jackson, but then Kate Box took over from Leah. And then we approached Belvoir, and I don't know, I wondered sometimes if, having been a dancer, you know, for so long in my life and having worked physically, and it's not that I'm not physical, but I'm not expressing my own self physically. I wonder if that's part of being drawn, because I don't get up on the floor and muck in with the movement as much as I used to. So, but I've always been interested in stories, and I've always been interested in words, and I have been frustrated with dance when it can't quite specifically articulate things, but I'm always love when movement can take over or be an interesting subtext. So it just feels like the amounts have swapped, where I used to have more movement with less speaking, and now there's more speaking. Although sometimes when I come now to direct a play in theatre, people think I'm going to do some intense physical theatre version of it, like directing A View from the Bridge, Arthur Miller's. And I wasn't. I was going to do the play the best I could, but I still always do. I think acting is helped, even if you sit around a table, it's helped by working physically. You think differently, you speak differently, you bring all sorts of different aspects to a role as an actor.
I remember seeing a production of Steppenwolf years ago at the Seymour Centre. I was always amazed that this production seemed incredibly physical. Like, you know, like every moment was punctuated by some sort of physicality, you know, be it a push, a shove, a hug, or whatever, but they were intense. All the movement was intense. And then, of course, you did Swallow, which was the first, you know, Steph Smith's piece that you did for National Theatre of Parramatta, believe it or not, in 2016. So even that's back 4 or 5 years now. And I always remember commenting to you at the time that although it wasn't a dance piece, you could sort of sense the rhythms of dance in it. You could sort of sense your choreographic prism, if you like, that you'd sort of like put over that piece. And it really was it gave it a completely different sort of complexity because of that. It also was very influential on the wonderful lighting design by Verity and other people as well. But I'd really be interested, I may have asked this question before, but what actually interested you in diving into that work specifically? And given that Steph is a Scottish playwright, where did you sort of think that the resonance was for audiences in Western Sydney? Which is sort of, it was a little odd that we were starting a theatre company, you know, in Western Sydney with a Scottish playwright around a play and a subject matter, and you're self-directing it. But somehow all that came together, and it was a fantastic production. So what got you interested in that in the first place?
Well, it was Joanne Key that sent me the script, and I think it's so wonderful because I was trying to get people to perceive me more as a director of plays. So to be sent a script like that again at that timing in my life was perfect. And I'm always looking for any script that has a universality to it. And I think actually if you can draw a script from another part of the world that resonates, you know, on the other side of the globe from where it was premiered, is actually a beautiful connection in human spirit, and that we don't, you know, that we do have these things in common, and all humans have things that they can connect to on no matter where you live. But at the same time, there was one aspect in the play which was all about a pelican, and the pelican was almost perceived as a unicorn, as if it had a mythical creature that you would never see in Glasgow. And I remember having conversations with Steph saying, I think we might have to adjust this, because most days on our way to rehearsal, in fact, outside the rehearsal room at the moment in Parramatta, we can see a pelican.
That's right. Pelicans actually land on the Parramatta River, don't they, at the end?
Yeah, yeah. So, look, I loved the characters. I loved that it was 3 women. I loved the interior. I loved it. It edged onto the surreal without taking it away from reality. So, and I just thought it was an exciting. I love that she didn't have stage directions, and that really appeals to me as someone that comes from devised work. sometimes the writer is so heavily imprinted on the work. And, you know, I'm not saying that that's not useful sometimes, but it can really denote what type of production you make. And what Steph had done is given the dialogue and basically let it float and be anywhere we decided to put it. So I really embraced that freedom, and so did the actresses that worked on it, that we could put it in so many interpretations and possibilities.
Yeah.
So it was that really appealed.
It had a lovely balance between metaphor and the reality. Like, you could sort of see that world, but then there was that world, and somehow the two just beautifully balanced themselves throughout the. Well, when I say balance, sometimes, you know, it was like that, sometimes like that, but overall, it was just a perfect sort of like coming together of a surreal world, an unreal world, but very much a real world at the same time.
Which, as you say, working with Verity and Anna Triglowan on the lights and set were from scratch, and Max Leanvert on sound.
And the soundscape was absolutely brilliant as well.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Every Brilliant Thing was the third piece that you've had an involvement with Riverside. Again, was Steve Rogers, you know, who wasn't the original cast member. It was Kate Mulvaney at Belvoir Street. And then Steve stepped into really just the 1 week season here, which he then reprised, of course, back earlier this year, wasn't it, at Belvoir Street again. And it was in the round, so it had a different sort of feel to it here, you know, which is that the Lennox Theatre has that capacity to be able to be reshaped whichever way you want to reshape it. You can do it end stage, you can take all the seating out, which we don't have enough spaces like that where we can actually adapt. In Australia, where people are prepared to really absolutely change the physical dynamics of a space.
Well, Robert, going right back to Suspense in Downstairs Seymour, I mean, that was kind of in the round, and we, you know, had, as I say, you know, you need those spaces to do interesting.
We don't have enough of them anymore. Well, we sort of have a few. I mean, Carriage Works is sort of that open space which you can play with, but people tend to create seating banks and then don't want to move them anymore because it's too costly. But you've got to make sure you've got the capacity to be able to literally change the physical dynamics in a space, because I think artists like to work in different spaces, and of course there's a lot of examples of that in Europe and in other places, not so much in Australia. But I think Australia is moving more and more towards flexible spaces, where a space can actually adapt to the needs of a particular production or a particular work, you know, that needs to change a space.
Yeah, I think that's being taken into account a lot more. In fact, I'm sure you know this more than I do. I think the new Sydney Theatre Company space can be two separate, but also can be one.
Now, tell me, what's special about working with Steve Rogers?
The way he taps humanity, the way he talks about acting as almost as not acting. His whole aim is that kind of style where you don't see it, but that's hard to do, and it's hard to have those conversations with other actors and what that means and how to tap into their interpretation of what that means. And he's just very he's very intelligent, but he's also very warm. Not the warmth and intelligence can often go together, but he's very perceptive. He's very good. I think he's got a childlike adult combination of perception of situations, and particularly family relationships. He's he's no bullshit. He's very
he's absolutely, like, he's not flamboyant. He talks to his other actors, but he also talks to an audience. He doesn't talk at an audience. He talks with an audience. And there's absolutely no sense of a fourth wall, although there often is a fourth wall. There's another world happening there. But he somehow travels across that and actually engages with an audience in a very direct way. And all the sorts of things I've seen him do. There's been quite a lot of things I've seen him do over the years.
I think he's disarmingly honest, not scared to reveal and to show. He's a man, and a straight man who's very somehow can access his vulnerability without it being too much. Like, it just clearly what it is, without it feeling ever forced. And he writes his characters like that. He's one of the few people I know who can very successfully write a female character. Although I suppose that's becoming more and more contentious these days.
There's a lot of contested areas in the performing arts these days. There's a lot of change going on as well. Looking at the future a little bit, what have you got planned for 2021 that you can tell us about?
Well, it's a tricky time, isn't it? I think
it is. Yeah.
Look, I have a play that I was meant to direct an ensemble, a Joanna Murray-Smith play Honor, that's now scheduled for September. But Robert, I'm also, and I haven't said this to anyone actually, I mentor a lot of people in different capacities. And I want to keep creating work. I want to, I've done a lot of plays that are more conventional plays, for want of a better word, as opposed to devised work. And I want to bring those worlds together now, where I work on plays that I'm more involved in them from scratch, but they're not dance theatre works, they are actual plays, rather than me reacting to the plays I've been given to read. I want to initiate more the ones that I direct, so that I can bring all the skills that I've had up to date into that experience.
That's working with new original work, new playwrights actually writing new work, and you working in a dramaturgical sort of directorial mentoring sort of way.
And not even just plays, but installations, music concerts, opera, wherever it finds itself.
Well, maybe that prompts another question. I mean, what do you think performance is going to look like? I guess you could say post-COVID, but what's it going to look like, say, in 5 or 10 years? You must have a bit of a view about where things are going, given all the change, which we just alluded to briefly there. But there is so much change going on. Where do you
I think it's already happening. I mean, there was a statistic I read not long ago of, I think it was, I'm not quoting the years, but something like in 2009, there was 60% or 80% of the companies did at least one Shakespeare or Chekhov. And in 2012, Nakia Louis was the predominant playwright. So I think continued diversity of representation will go on, and we'll see much truer representation of our population. And I think Riverside is perfectly placed there to truly represent that. So I think I'm hoping that even though I respect the older subscriber generation that keep our theatres alive, I'm hoping that our audiences will have them, and everyone younger and non-white, all genders. I just really think that is absolutely becoming the subject, all versions of accessibility. I think it's just going to permeate subject matter, productions, audiences more and more and more. And I think that's theatre leading society, really.
Well, there's a lot of stories out there, and there's lots of people who have told them in the past, but there's a lot more people who will be telling them in the future, I think.
Yeah.
And it's true. And sometimes, I mean, we often get caught up in a debate here around authenticity versus craft skill, but it's a mixture of all of that. If you're going to tell stories, you want to be able to tell the stories really well. And someone like yourself, who brings an enormous amount of experience, craft, background, sometimes can assist people to tell their stories even better than they may be able to without your assistance. So I look forward to who you're going to be working with. We're sort of coming to the end of this, so I was going to ask. You're sort of like already. I've got to ask these questions because I'm told I've got to ask these as the final ones. Why do you do what you do? I mean, I think you've already indicated that through this interview. But why do you, when you work it out over a lot of years, a few decades now, what has actually driven you to keep doing all of this all the time?
Oh, it's not that I haven't floundered, and I went and worked in a shop for 2.5 years, Remo. I've had times when it hasn't made sense, but basically when I go to sleep at night or wake up at 3 a.m, really is more like it. It's the thing that makes sense to me. It's from an early age, seeing work, whether it was artwork or performance work, that I felt expressed something of the human condition. And what baffled me when I was very young was it was a stranger articulating something that I felt was a private dilemma. And I'm not religious. I wasn't brought up with any religion, and so not overdoing the kind of what art can be, but it's the thing that has replaced that ability to understand why we're here and what I want to leave behind. And it's actually the process of working with other human beings to create is just one of the most, it can be complicated, it can be fraught, it's not always easy, but there's something incredibly human and engaging and real and makes sense to me about being alive.
It's all encompassing too. It's totally fulfilling, but it's sort of like it takes over your life a little bit, doesn't it, I imagine?
Yes, it does. And I don't have a family, so I think that kind of, it's where that's fulfilled that a lot, although I know a lot of people juggle both. I'm not sure I ever, it's part of, you know, a decision I made that I wasn't sure I would be able to do both. But it's a calling, it's a vocation. It kind of, it's why I called the company Force Majeure. It never was meant to mean major force. It means irrepressible compulsion or irresistible compulsion, as well as beyond one's control. And I feel sometimes the arts take over you and pull you along.
It's a bit like now. I mean, you know, a lot of us have been exercising force majeure clauses in our contracts, but in a strange sort of way, that's made us all then go away and work out how we can get the contract back in shape. So we start to rethink things. We start to actually create new worlds because of that force majeure, in a sense, because there's a force which is suddenly forcing us in a new direction. So it's really quite, you know, you're sort of right in that sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also even the thing of play, I've always felt when I've gone to rehearsals and we play the tasks, the physical tasks, it's so much like what children do. And I think it's such a privilege.
It is.
To be able to muck in, because a lot of us as adults just lose that sense of play, and the theatre is a place.
Oh, and that's the downfall of the world in a way. If we could all just keep our childlike innocence and our childlike wonder of the world right through until we leave the world, I think the world would be a better place. So I've got to ask this question too. What's the last live performance you saw that you'd like to remember?
I don't want to say work that I directed because it's got nothing to do with me directing it, but every brilliant thing was different every night. I felt like the audience were as much the performers, and it's such a perfectly crafted work that I feel very much I was as a midwife involved in the process. So for me, every night not knowing who he was going to propose to and how, I've hardly ever been, and I've been in a lot of interactive performances with audience, but nothing was quite as had me on the edge of the seat and delighted and touched, and just did so much of what I hope theatre to do with seemingly so little, almost like a stand-up comic where they are there with a mic and nothing else. It was such a bare production. It didn't have the bells and whistles of everything. And so I have to take my hat off to that experience. And
what it did, what it actually did though, was what you were saying. It let, I mean, those little performances I watched from those audiences too, they were in a performance. In a sort of a way, Steve let people into that opportunity to be a child and slightly make believe again in a sort of a way, which was really interesting. So they had to sort of go with it, and they let down their guard. And it was amazing the number of people that were prepared to do it. And they did it really entertainingly too. Like, you know, it was really fantastic. What you said, you never knew what was going to come out from an audience. And every time it came out, it was usually incredibly good.
Yeah. So, you know, even though I was involved with it, that is absolutely going to stay with me for the rest of my life, that work.
What are you binging on at the moment? Everyone seems to be binging on something. Are you binging on anything?
Yes, I've done Orthodox, I've done Ozark, and, you know, so many things. But at the moment, like last night, I was watching a thing called Duty and Shame. And it's a British-Japanese BBC and Japanese mixture. So it's about, and it's quite extraordinary. And there's one of the best characters I've seen on TV for quite a while. It's a Japanese rent boy called Rodney, and it's worth watching for that alone. But it does have a very terrible dance sequence in it at the end. Improvised. Oh, no,
you wanted to jump in and re-choreograph it.
Oh, I just wanted to take it out.
That's lovely. And finally, this is a bit partial, this question. What's your favourite Riverside moment? Hopefully there is one.
Yes. I was thinking about this. Look, I found White Pearl quite confronting in a lot of ways. And I went away trying to process that a lot. And I think it was called Dads or Form Dance, when they did the piece about their fathers.
Oh yes, it's a dad's thing, I think it was called.
Yeah.
It's Carl Skibber's piece. Yeah, fantastic.
And it felt, you know, it felt derivative a little bit of some of Force Majeure's work, but in the highest compliment. So I was really, I loved seeing a younger generation tackling that form, tackling the subject matter, doing it with their own version of their own skills. I always remember very beautiful dance between. So yeah, and I'm going to throw, you know, I was very touched by seeing my brother direct after so many years having
Oh
not
yes, his
directed. So
lovely
the
piece that
timing
came
to
in.
me.
Absolutely, yes, which I saw up in Bathurst first, and then we saw it, and I said we've got to get that to come down to Riverside. In fact, I think we'd made that decision before I even saw it, because
Right.
I just knew it was going to be interesting, what the script
So
I'd sort of
I
seen.
feel like
It's
I'm being
fantastic to have it here.
nepotistic, but it affected me a lot. Yeah.
Well, I can say one of the favourite moments I have at Riverside are when people like yourself come in and walk in the door, you know, and there's an opportunity to say hi, because and I'm always constantly um, chuffed in a way that people like you actually come here to Parramatta and spend
Oh,
time here, and are also so friendly and accommodating when you actually come. I always feel when you've walked into our door, you become a little bit of our family here for the period of time that you're here, and you engage in it at that sort of level. You know, you don't ever feel aloof or remote.
oh God.
You are very involved from the moment you actually walk through our doors here. So we look forward to that fourth time when you come back and actually spend time at Riverside, because we'd love to see you here again as soon as we can.
I would love that, Robert, but it works both ways. You're very welcoming, and it's an incredibly, you know, it's both professional and a family mixture. So, you know, I've always felt welcomed, and I'm always excited to get out there and,
Well, it's a human, I mean, theatre and performance is a sort of human endeavour. So if you start taking the humanity out of it, or the humour out of it, and I'm sure there's another H I could fit in there as well, but if you take any of that out of it, then somehow it isn't worth doing. So,
yeah.
you know, that's why we continue to do it. And it's why spaces like this are very important in terms of communities.
But I
So we look forward to having you back.
Yeah, and Parramatta is just going to increase and increase in its absolute
Yeah, and we've got so many
vital
stories,
role.
and there's so many different communities, you know, have all got the most extraordinary stories to tell, of either past stories, current stories, and also stories that they can sort of see into the future they want to talk about as well. So, so yeah, there's lots happening.
And you've also, through all the things you've done before even coming to Parramatta, have welcomed so many mixed art forms, and that's what I think.
Yeah, we like that. I always say we've got to keep surprising our audience. If we just let them see the same old, they'll go away. We've got to keep bringing them in. They walk in and they go, "Oh my goodness, never thought that was possible." Thank you very, very much for spending a bit of time with us. You know, it's your time. It was absolutely delightful seeing you, and I look forward to seeing you in person very soon back here at Riverside. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Robert.